A common mistake that I see during leash reactivity training is this. Tightening the leash when you pass your dog's trigger. If your dog has barked and lunged at other dogs in the past, it does make sense, even unconsciously, to tighten that leash because you're anticipating that occurring again and you ready yourself. The problem with leash tension, though, is that it makes reactivity more likely and it worsens it. Think of the fight or flight response. If leash tension makes your reactive dog feel like they can't take the space that they need, they're more likely to have those huge reactions at the top of the canine ladder of aggression. I want to give you 3 tips to help with this. Tip 1 is to make sure that you fully understand dog threshold. I like to think of a dog's threshold like a doorway threshold. When you cross it, you go from one zone to another. With dogs, when the threshold is crossed, they go from one emotional zone to another. They go from coping to no longer coping. For training to be effective, we need to make sure that the dog is kept under threshold during it. Behaviors at the upper end of the canine ladder of aggression are certainly a sign that the dog is over threshold, but a more subtle sign that I commonly tell people to look out for is if their typically food-motivated dog loses interest in training treats during training. I strongly encourage you to watch this video about dog threshold. Understanding the contents of that video is going to make your training more effective, and I also think that the video will make you laugh. Tip 2 is to make sure that the distance from your dog's trigger is sufficient. Choosing the proper training distance is vital to effective training. In the threshold video that I previously linked, it explains which factors you should consider when deciding how much space your dog is going to require from their trigger for success. When training, there are 3 things that I watch for to let me know if the distance I've chosen is adequate. The first and most obvious is if the dog is barking and lunging, I know that they need more space. Secondly, I watch for more subtle body language. If the dog is putting tension on the leash, if they're strongly forward leaning, if they have a fixed gaze, or if they have a pointed leg, I encourage taking a training break or add extra distance. And third, if a previously loaded marker word fails to get the dog's attention twice, then I add extra space. In general, I prefer to verbally encourage the dog to follow me farther away from their trigger.
Come here, no. Good job.
But if that fails, I'll walk my hands up the leash like so, and I'll lure them away. Please keep in mind that when you first start training, your dog may need a lot of space. This might mean that you have to work in fields or areas with extra space in order to have a successful session. I also strongly encourage you to train an emergency U-turn so you can turn and avoid situations that your dog isn't ready for on walks without any leash tension. I will link this tutorial for how I train an emergency U-turn in the caption, as well as this video that explains how I eventually train reactive dogs to walk right past their trigger. If you're enjoying this video and you're finding it helpful so far, I would really appreciate a like and a comment to let me know. Tip number 3 is that if you can't help but tense the leash, try holding it differently. I mentioned the importance of you not tensing the leash when your reactive dog goes past a trigger. However, I do recognize that in stressful situations, it's really hard to break old habits. If that's the case, I suggest changing how you hold the leash for a few days so that you can reprogram yourself. When we hold the leash like this, it's naturally really easy to lift our arm and tense the leash even subconsciously. Instead, try holding the leash behind your back for a little while. This makes lifting your arm more unnatural, so it's more difficult to do it unconsciously. It's important to remember that lack of leash tension won't in itself solve reactivity, but leash tension will worsen reactivity. If you can train yourself to not add that tension, then the rest of your reactivity training will be more successful. If you want more help with your dog's leash reactivity, then I'll link my entire training playlist here. Happy training. I'll see you in the next video.